What's going on YouTube? Username Kite562 here with another audio review for y'all on this Friday at 6 p.m. I really don't know when I'm gonna schedule this video, but I just wanted to post it on a Friday at 6 p.m. and it's my review of Desperation by Stephen King. Now, this is a 5-part story, so sit back and relax because I'm gonna try to make parts for this story, like parts 1 through 5, but this is gonna be a 6-parter with the introduction, so this is my audio review of Desperation, so be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy the content on this channel. So let's get off with the introductions out of the way and get on with part 1 of Desperation by Stephen King. Part 1, Highway 50. In the House of the Wolf, the House of the Scorpion. So for the plot of this story, Peter and Mary Jackson get stopped on Highway 50 by a police officer on the interstate near Desperation, Nevada. However, since the sister-in-law smokes pot, Peter and Mary get pulled over for possession of marijuana with intention to sell by the corrupted officer. And so for the first side note, 4 chapters in, and it's a very trippy experience. The closer people get to the town of Desperation, the more unhinged they become, it seems. I thought Peter got killed by the officer when Peter was following the officer's commands. Again, I feel like this is going to be a trippy story, so it was really hard for me to keep track of things left and right, but all in all, this part really had me at the edge of my seat as I continued reading. And so continuing on, first the Jackson couple gets apprehended by a very suspicious police officer of Desperation. Then we have the death of Christy Carver that Ralph Carver told to Ellie Carver. This story is giving me Children of the Corn vibes. Does this story have an otherworldly entity that the residents of Desperation have to give live sacrifices to? This also feels like The Stand as well, with how intense the introduction of the police officer was with the Jackson couple. And so for my final thoughts on part 1, it's a huge cast of characters with a lot of backstory before they arrive in Desperation, Nevada. I really enjoyed hearing about the Jackson couple and the Carver family, mainly the time David Carver spent with his friend Brian Ross before his horrible bike accident. It was hard to keep track of all the characters being introduced, mainly the character John Edward Marinville, and if I mispronounced that name, I apologize. Also, the police officer's name is Collier Intragian. So that's the end of part 1, so on to part 2. Part 2, Desperation in these silences, something may rise. So for the plot of part 2, Steve and Cynthia Smith make their way to Interstate 50 to somewhere unknown. Perhaps Officer Colley may find a way to get them under arrest on their way to Desperation, Nevada. So starting off, why is Officer Colley collecting all these family and a writer though? Is it to repopulate the town of Desperation, Nevada, or is there something out there that could do to our large cast of characters? So I really didn't have much to say since this part had some spoiler territory, like this town could have some Children of the Corn vibes in it, but definitely read the novel. There's also the regulators in here as well. And so for my final thoughts on part 2, it was a very eye-catching read for me, especially what David had to go through along with discovering these weird creature statues that give off strange reactive energy. I just hope Ellie Carver will be alright. I just felt so worried for her as I read this. So with that out of the way, on to part 3. Part 3, The American West, Legendary Shadows. So for the plot of Part 3, Steve and Cynthia Smith, along with Todd Billingsley, are both looking down a mysterious pit of some sort, it seems. So starting off, Part 3 of this novel really seems all over the place for me, with the sudden shifts of going from the Smith and Billingsley trio to suddenly then shifting to John Marinville with the Carver family, trying to figure out a way out of Desperation, Nevada. As I said before, this book is a trippy experience. So continuing on, there has to be some kind of alien force possessing Officer Colley here. It also seems to have taken over Ellie Carver as well. Could it have left Officer Colley's body to inhabit a new host? This feels like a take on the xenomorph evolution phase, however, with a more Lovecraftian twist to the mysterious creatures depicted in the statues, like a spider and then I think a snake, and then it was just a really eerie experience. But when I say this reminds me of like xenomorphs, you have the face hugger stage, which the monster was like some sort of goo apparently, and then it just possesses people left and right. So continuing on, man, part 3 of Desperation is really intense. First, the fight with the cougar in the police station, then Audrey Weiler choking out David. Furthermore, Ellie fighting with Mary. Part 3 is slathered with intense tragedy. I really enjoyed the moment with Tom Billingsley and the rest of the crew. Chapter 3, Part 3, and I'll leave it at that because I really don't want to spoiler too much of this story. It was just a really enjoyable experience. So my final thoughts is I really enjoyed the wavering parts of tension with Part 3 of this novel. Along with David Carver's dream sequence, it really showed me who's actually dead and who's still alive. I still can't figure out if Peter Jackson is alive or dead, so please let me know down in the comments below. So that's still boggling my mind after reading this novel. So on to Part 4. Part 4, The China Pit, God is Cruel. So with the plot of Part 4, with David Carver's team, they figure out that they have a bigger purpose than to just escape Desperation, Nevada from the mines, but more to defeat the evil presence that resides within the town itself, which it seems to enjoy possessing people's bodies if the host is strong enough. So starting off with my notes, I really like the fact that David Carver's team has learned how to fully trust each other in this crazy situation in Desperation. However, I will say that Officer and Trajan really reminded me of Sheriff Hoyt from the 2003 remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, played by R. Lee Ermey, E-R-M-E-Y. And so continuing on, it was really enjoyable to see John and David talking to one another after David returned to John's wallet to him. The twist about the bar, though, in Chapter 4, Part 4, really pulled the rug from out beneath me. However, it was a really sweet seeing David telling John about his friend Brian surviving that horrific bike accident. So, for my final thoughts on Part 4, really enjoyed Parts 3 and 4 of this story, with the reveals of David's team along with all the other tragedies they had to face early on. I really do wonder how The Regulators by Richard Bachman connect to this book in some way. The later half of Desperation is really proving itself to me as a novel. So with that said, on to Part 5. Part 5, Highway 50, Excused Early. And so, not much to say about this final part, but it has an alright read. Not too long, not too short. However, I will say this, if you're going to read The Regulators next, read Desperation first, because Desperation was written by Stephen King, and then Richard Bachman was his pen name, just so he could test the waters of it. So, there's that. I mean, let me continue on here, which I may or may not do, but the book Desperation does have some great memorable moments within it. Okay, let me start this over. Sorry about that. Not much to say about this final part, but it was an alright read. Not too long, not too short. However, I will say this, if you're going to read The Regulators next, read Desperation first, then The Regulators, which I may or may not do, but the book Desperation does have some great memorable moments within it. Like a score of 7.7 out of 10, some moments were confusing for me, and it was difficult for me to figure out who's still alive and who died. That's mainly the reason why I rated Desperation the way that I did, since I usually use a 10-point scale with decimals in it. So yeah, I recommend you check out this book out at the library or something if you want a thrilling cosmic horror kind of story. So that's my review of Stephen King's Desperation. I almost said Regulation here, but yeah, that's my review of Desperation. So as always, be sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the content on this channel. I'm your host, Kite562 of Kite562 Books and Manga Reviews, signing out. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day, everybody. Later.